Welcome to this episode of the B2B Marketers on a Mission podcast, and I'm your host, Christian Klepp. Today, I'll be talking to Becky Lawlor. She is the founder and chief research and content officer at Redpoint. With over 10 years of experience creating thought leadership content for B2B tech brands, from startups to Fortune 500s, Becky saw firsthand how original research-based content could drive performance unlike almost any other type of content. Her goal is to ensure that every project is tailored to deliver thought-leading, high-quality content that will deliver her clients' content marketing goals. Tune in to find out more about what this B2B marketer's mission is. Okay, Becky Lawlor, welcome to the show.
Excited to be here.
Great to be connected, Becky. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I think you're the first person I've interviewed on this particular topic, right? There's a lot of folks that come on the show and talk about B2B content marketing per se, but not necessarily so much about the research aspect of it. And that's what I'm really excited to dig into today.
Great. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about.
I'm sure it is. All right, well, let's dive in. So, Becky, you've been on a mission to help B2B companies produce original research-based content, I'm going to say, that achieves high marketing performance. So for this conversation, let's focus on a topic that I think is going to be very useful to the audience, and that's how to discover what content drives B2B buyers to act. And let me just say, who doesn't want that, right? So for context and for the audience's benefit, your company, Redpoint, created this 2024-2025 blueprint for high impact content, and it's a report. And in that report, you help decode the exact content types that trigger purchasing decisions. So I'm going to kick off the conversation with this question. Why do you believe original research-based content is the key to success in B2B content marketing?
Yeah, so I have my own personal beliefs, but I also, as you noted, this research report that I did, I actually went out and surveyed 250 B2B buyers about what type of content they will actually share with others, give their personal data for, or even make their purchasing decisions off, among a lot of other questions that I kind of asked them around, impacts of the content. So what I found in that research really drove also what I personally believe, which is that original research just fundamentally performs better and stronger across almost every marketing KPI you can think of than any other type of content. In the report, you'll see, 91% of B2B buyers say that original research increases their awareness of a brand, and 93% say that it builds trust. And that was far higher than any other kind of, like I asked about educational content, how-to content. I asked about different types of original research too, to be more nuanced, like interview-based or analysis of like internal data versus surveys. So in that there's a bunch of different ways. So the 91% is kind of a more overarching of different types of original research. But across the board, any type of content that had some kind of original research performed better. And I guess really quickly, I think we should just maybe define what original research is. It should be a term that people are familiar with, but not everybody is. So what I mean by that is it has to have some unique insight that essentially isn't already there. And typically, original research would be running some kind of survey, but it can also be your internal data that you have analyzed and are sharing, but it's still data that nobody else has. It can also actually be like third-party data, but you've done a unique analysis of that data. And the fourth type, which is probably the easiest type to get, is more what we call their qualitative data, which can just be interview-based. It's still original research. You've gone out, you've interviewed one or more people to get their insights, and now you're delivering those insights, which are unique to your audience.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I know we're going to get into the details later on in the conversation. I couldn't help but ask you this question. Just based on this research that you conducted, what were your findings in terms of how, or for lack of a better word, how haphazard the buyer's journey is in B2B?
Yeah. I mean, I think I didn't drill into the buyer's journey really in depth in this report, but I think that it kind of goes to the point. One of the things I did ask about is how often they want content published, and especially original research. And buyers, I thought it would be lower amount, but they actually wanted it. The majority wanted it quarterly, and the second level wanted it monthly. So I think to me, what that says is when buyers are on a journey, period, and we all know they kind of go all over and it's not linear at all. Um, they do want content. They do want a lot of content. They are looking for answers. So I think you really need to keep that top of mind. And the more that you're delivering, again, that unique value through like original research, the more you continue to build your authority and your brand awareness. And those things are critical when it comes to closing the deal. It's going to be much easier to close the deal if you've have built a lot of awareness and authority in your buyer's mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've got another follow-up question for you, Becky, only because you brought up that word, right? That word that seems to be very loosely used these days, value, right? Delivering value, right? So in the context of the research, define what you consider valuable to B2B buyers.
Well, I think value to B2B buyers, I did ask them like what made content stand out. And that was an open-ended question. And what people responded was really the data. There are a bunch of different ways it could add value. It could add value by having data to actually be able to now go make their case for something, because now they can go to the other stakeholders internally and have real data to support kind of their positioning. Content stood out. Case studies was another one that performed pretty well in that report, and that is because case studies, especially if there was a problem that they felt really aligned with, it was their own problem as well, and they saw solutions to it. That was another high value type of content for folks. So again, that goes to that kind of relevancy piece, just really making sure you're relevant. But really, people were just looking for insights that they didn't already have. They wanted something. Value is really giving them something new to think about, or allowing them to benchmark against other people to understand their performance and where they maybe are doing well, but also where they really need to invest to improve. So those kinds of things were all high value types of content.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next set of questions, which I did say was going to be around the research that you conducted. And you mentioned some of the answers already, but based on the research you conducted, what content formats do B2B buyers value the most and why?
Yeah, so it really, as I said, there was, I asked about different types of original research as well as like how to content, educational content. And I even asked about like, thought leadership content that didn't include original research, and all of those ranked lower. But any type, whether it was industry specific data analysis, interviews of peers or industry experts, or survey data from industry peers, those three consistently ranked as the highest types of content that people felt would push them to act in some way, as well as just also help build more authority and awareness about a brand.
Okay, okay. Speaking of authority and awareness, that was a great segue to the next question. What type of content, based on the research again, did you find will help to improve the brand credibility of B2B companies?
Yeah, again, it's the same thing. You really need to, I mean, I hate to kind of beat the same drum again, but you really need to invest in doing some kind of original research. And, I think the reason for that is because when you're investing and you're actually investing in your industry and really bringing new insights to that industry, it shows, one, that you know the space. But I think even just showing that you're willing to make that investment helps build your authority, because you're doing something that maybe a lot of your competitors aren't doing right now. And you are showing that you have insights that your competitors don't have about the industry and the space.
Right, right. I did have one follow-up question for you, and maybe you found this in your research, and or maybe you didn't. in terms of the different types of so you've mentioned all these different types of content, right? These content types and this content format. Was there a particular style in which the content should be structured or written that would resonate more with the buyers? Do they want you to give it to them straight? Did they want it in with text and infographics? Did they want it to be more visual? What were your findings?
Yeah, I did ask a question kind of around the format that they preferred, and what we found was that, and this actually surprised me because I thought it would be lower down, is that that actually deep analysis. Because I asked you, do you want in-depth analysis? How valuable is that? Visual, visualization. So there was a couple of different things in there, but the in-depth analysis and then making it highly visible and scannable were kind of the two highest, but the in-depth analysis actually was highest. So I think that it's important to realize that they do want you to not just present the numbers, they want some thought and analysis behind it, but then think about how to still do that in a highly visual scannable way. And I think you can do a lot with headlines and headers and call outs to combine both of those.
That's a really interesting finding, and it's something also I've been talking to other B2B content marketers about for years now, I think, right? Like and I don't know what your experience has been, Becky, but like, there's folks that say like, no, it's got to be factual and boring because at the end of the day, boring wins. And in my head, I'm like going, said no one ever, right? Like, I mean, even if it is a vertical that is very, let's just say, technical in nature, they still, I truly believe that the reader, in this case, the B2B buyers, want to digest that content in a way that's, it's easily digestible, let's put it that way, but it's also in a format that helps provoke some kind of like new way of thinking about specific topics. Am I right to say that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's where I think the combination of how you visualize it along with I was surprised because I think there's also this idea that, we just need to dumb down content. Content needs to be shorter. People don't have attention spans. They're just going to skim everything. So seeing that, I think when buyers are really in the buying stage and they're trying to make a decision, especially on something really technical, maybe something really expensive, more complex, they need some analysis. It's true that they're not just there for entertainment. They're there to make a decision. So they need knowledge, but you still want to capture attention. So I think that that's where kind of hitting a nice balance of having some really kind of, edutainment type of headlines. So you're going to draw some headlines from your most kind of shocking or interesting pieces of data, but then you need to go deeper about why that is. I think that's kind of a good way to balance that sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so for the next question, your report also identifies what you call ROI boosters. So apparently this is where you recommend that B2B companies should focus on creating high impact results driven content. And you might have mentioned this already, but can you provide some more examples of these?
So yeah, again, I think any type of content you do that has that original research in it is an ROI booster. My clients have seen usually 2 to 3 times the lead generation from these types of reports. They just tend to drive more engagement. And when we asked in the survey, folks said they were 2.5 times more likely to share this type of content, and they were 2 times more likely to share their personal data. So it is a type of content I think you still can justifiably gate to drive more of those leads, which should help with ROI. But it also is great. This kind of data also works really well for sales enablement. It works on SEO, backlinks, driving traffic. It also, and even in today's world where SEO is getting a lot harder with generative AI search and things, this type of content is actually really effective for SEO because it is kind of the type of content that is authoritative that search engines are prioritizing right now. So it's going to help drive that. It's also great for media mentions, which again can, it's a little harder to tie direct ROI to. But I've also seen companies use it to get like prestigious speaking engagements that they weren't able to get before at trade shows and events and conferences, which again can drive more leads and just more general brand awareness. The other piece of content, though, is also I do want to mention is customer stories. I think people already know that those can be high value, especially later in the buying cycle. And again, those rated pretty high. So that would be the other one where I would say if you're not doing it, those. The other great thing about those is in some ways they are still they're not research per se, but they are unique insights. You've gone out, you have a real world story that you're telling here. And so in addition to just creating customer stories, I would highly encourage folks to make sure that they're really weaving the problems, the solutions, and the results throughout all of their content so that they're like, even if they're just writing a blog article, they're bringing in those unique insights again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I did have two follow-up questions for you, Becky, and I wonder if this is something that you found as you were conducting this research or not. Certainly, with folks conducting original research and that giving their content that high degree of differentiation, there's probably two camps of professionals out there. Like, and the one camp is saying like gate all that stuff, right? Because we've done so much work, and the very least is that if people are coming to our website, we should be able to capture all that content information. And there's the other camp that says, well, I wouldn't gate all of it. I mean, you can gate some of it, but like the rest, you can just have them download it, and we don't need to get anything in return. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, generally I'm a don't gate stuff kind of person, but I also live in a practical world where as a marketer, you do need to drive leads, you need to collect emails somehow. And I feel like, as I said earlier, that if you've invested in true original research, whether that's, a survey or an analysis of your own data that's really useful and valuable, it does justify and can work as a gated piece of content. But even there, I kind of go with the strategy of like gate it for a month maybe, but then put the whole thing on your website so that you're then getting the SEO benefit from it. So gate it for a short period of time, try to get those, leads in quickly with that first kind of campaign launch, and then open it up so that you're getting other benefits from that content and it's not staying gated that long. That's my recommended approach.
Yeah, that's definitely that's an interesting one. So you were saying gate it for like a month and no more. Am I right?
Yeah, a month or 6 weeks, but I
Mhm.
wouldn't go much longer than that. If you want, I mean, again, it all depends on what somebody's goal is with the piece of content. Everybody has different kind of priority goals, but if you were trying to get like the most juice in a number of different ways out of it, I would say gate it for, a month or 6 weeks, drive your ads, drive whatever towards that, get those leads, and then get it up on your blog, your website, to then get the benefit of backlinks and driving that SEO traffic to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, fantastic. That was the first follow-up question. Now, the second follow-up question on the topic of case studies or customer success stories, as they're now also called. Everybody likes to see that, right? It's a type of a social proof. It's a demonstration of how said company helped their customers to succeed, and things of that nature. So, from the research, were you able to like find out if there was anything in particular that B2B buyers were looking for when they looked at case studies? Like these things absolutely had to be there.
Yeah, I didn't ask any in-depth questions around it, so I can't say that I got those kind of insights. But I'm planning to do this report annually, so that might be something good to consider to go deeper on that one for this year.
Yeah, I would hazard a guess that they would look at the results, right? Like,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think results are always
hmm
important,
yeah,
but I think my own opinion when you're creating those is that you should create two
okay,
two levels of a case study. The first one should be deep and in depth, and that is so you can use it in all the other ways that make sense in your content. But then you need to have a really kind of short, pithy one, because a lot of times I think customers won't necessarily read the in-depth one, but by developing it, it allows you to pull that stuff out in so many other ways in your content. If you just start with the short one, then you don't have the depth to use in different articles and topics where it would apply.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it also depends on the situation and at what level or what stage both sides find themselves at, like the vendor and the potential customer. Like if the potential customer were truly interested, okay, they read the short version of the case study, and okay, let's have another call and let's ask the vendor to go in depth. Like, okay, we see the results here, but talk to us about your approach, your methodology. How did you implement all this stuff, right? Because they want to see like as part of the due diligence process, right?
Yeah, and I think that to your point, that's when a more in-depth one is important when they're getting down to really understanding your processes and your approach, um, and how you work. I mean, I think it's really a way to show how you work with clients and whether that your culture and your approach is right for them.
Right, right, exactly, exactly. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next question, and I know we can go really broad and or deep with this one, but just give us something top level here. So, based on this report and the research you conducted, what would you say are some of the key pitfalls that content marketers need to avoid based on what you've uncovered?
The first pitfalls would just be not investing in doing some kind of original research. If you think that you can just go out and kind of do these generic SEO blogs and stuff like that, you're not going to elevate your content to the point that you're going to have a competitive differentiation. So that would be a big pitfall. And another one would just be, again, not using your customer stories across broadly. There's just so many different ways that you can use them. So you should really be getting a lot of mileage. And that would go for if you do invest in original research. I also see that pitfall. Like there's so many different ways you can break it out. Webinars, like I said, speaking engagement, sales enablement, SEO. I mean, you really need to think about your distribution channels and really maximize. I mean, that's how you really maximize the ROI of it, is that you're putting it across so many different uses and channels to get the most out of it. Now, I want to talk about some pitfalls specifically in doing research, because I just see these. I think a lot of folks try to do it yourself, which I totally am supportive of, but it is more complex than just creating a piece of research. And one of the biggest pitfalls I see is people just thinking, oh, I'll just whip out a survey, no problem. And I want people to kind of pause for a minute and recognize that actually the survey is so critical and so important that it's done right. And so if you were to get help anywhere, that's where I'd get help, because I see this over and over, that they don't spend a lot of time and effort on the survey, and then suddenly the data comes back. It doesn't. There's not really a narrative there. There's just a bunch of different data points because there was 10 cooks in the kitchen and everybody wanted to know something, but now you don't really have a story. You just have data. Or the way the questions were asked, now it just kind of makes it hard to analyze. It makes it hard to message it and in content. Another pitfall I see is people kind of confusing market research with content marketing original research. If you just go to a market research firm for this kind of help, I've seen this again as well. Like market research firms are great at doing market research and they understand how to do that, but a lot of them don't actually know how to write a survey again for content marketing. So when you're writing those surveys, again, you really need to be thinking about, how does this translate into headlines? How does this translate into the message? How is this translating into a narrative I'm going to tell? Because as a content marketer, you're in the business of storytelling. You're in the business of having a narrative and headlines. So you really need to be thinking about that right from out of the gate. And the third one is just the data piece, that, again, making sure either you have the in-house capabilities or you're using a vendor that really can do in-depth analysis. This is another huge pain point and pitfall. There's so much cross-tab or analysis that can be done question by question. And if you're not getting that done, you're missing so many data points, so many additional stories, so much ROI from the investment you've already made. So make sure that you have those data capabilities, or that your vendor truly has those data capabilities, because I see that as a huge pain point often for folks.
Yeah, no, that's definitely some great advice there. And I'm sorry if you saw me like grin to myself there, because you just made me, you just reminded me. And I think we've all been in those situations before, either in meeting rooms with clients or back then when I was in product marketing, where you're facing the senior management and then it's this whole like decision by committee
Right.
initiative, right? Or opinionitis and analysis paralysis. And no, I think we should add these questions in there because this is like so important. And then they give each other what I call the internal high five. And then
Right.
and then you start going out to market and you realize like, yeah, these are not the questions we should be asking at all, or these are not the insights that we are meant to extract from this customer. And so I can totally relate, and these are some really important pitfalls to avoid, and hence also the reason why perhaps there are certain things that the company shouldn't be doing by themselves, and they should actually like outsource that to an expert.
Yeah, I mean, I understand
Mm.
that budgets are what they are, and you
Yeah.
can't always do that. But I think if you can get some help, it's going to make all the difference in terms of making sure that you're having a credible data, you have a strong narrative with it. And again, to that other point of like, you also need to make sure you're getting insights that are interesting externally to the, internal stuff as people start like, well, I'd like to know this and I'd like to know this. And it's like, well, take a step back. Are you doing this for your own internal knowledge? Which that's great if that's what you're doing it for. But if you're
Yes.
doing it for content marketing, you need to think about what your audience needs, what your goals are. If it's media, what does the media care about? If it's lead gen, what are those leads going to care about?
Yep.
So,
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, Becky. So we get to the point in the conversation where we're talking about actionable tips, and you've given us plenty already. But like, just based on this conversation, if somebody were listening to this interview and you want them to walk away with 3 to 5 things they can act upon based on this uh, research that you've conducted, what would those things be?
yeah, so I think a very low hanging fruit one would be conduct more interviews with both internal subject matter experts, external subject matter experts, and industry experts. I think that's not a high bar. Most people can conduct interviews and then bring that into the content. It doesn't cost a lot of money to do that. It's just not as involved. Yes, it's more involved than just whipping out a piece of content without that piece, but it's definitely worth it to bring in those unique original insights. Again, another one would be just to create more customer stories, invest in that because there's just so many different ways you can sprinkle that in and have those real world insights, which are kind of similar to the interviews, but different, right? And then the last one is, again, yeah, I think every company should be investing in some kind of original research, whether if you have your own data, if you are some kind of analytics technology or just have a way to anonymize your data and pull it out. That is a great option. It can be challenging in its own right. I've worked with a lot of companies doing that, and it has its challenges as well to get the data out from your technology and into a workable format. But that's one option. Or I think you can invest in one survey even a year and really get a lot of mileage from it. A lot of my clients, I feel like it's a great foundational piece. And then you can use the data you've got, especially if, like I said, if you get that in-depth analysis done, you have data and stories and different angles and topics you can use for the entire year to fuel your content strategy. And your content strategy is better because now you've actually surveyed your audience and you know what their challenges and pain points are and what you should be talking to them about.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Okay. So, what is a status quo in your area of expertise that you passionately disagree with, and why? Off you go.
Yes, I have one for sure. And it is this idea that you have to use a third party research firm versus producing brand owned research. And what I mean by that is particularly, this idea that you have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and go with a big consultancy firm or a big academic research, to do this research, which shuts out a lot of people right there just because they don't have the budgets. But even if you have the budget to do it, I don't think that it's actually the best way often, because when you invest in brand owned, you are setting yourself up as the industry expert and authority. When you do it with a third party, you're actually not owning that piece of authority as much. And so because this was such a big, myth that I wanted to break in my report, I actually asked B2B buyers who they trusted more. Did they trust research from a third party more than they trust research done from a brand. And the results were that 54% said they trust them equally. So it doesn't really matter to the majority. They don't care who doesn't. But of those that had a
Wow.
preference,
Yeah.
of those that had a preference, 29% said they trusted brand conducted research more than research conducted by a third party. So that was more than said they trusted the third party. So, and then I went on to ask for those that had said they trusted brands more than a third party, why?
Mhm.
And the responses that people gave were really, and it makes sense. They said the brands have to care about their reputation in the marketplace.
Yeah.
I think buyers aren't dumb. They know that even if you're going with a third party, you're paying that third party. And some folks even said, well, the third party is just getting paid to kowtow to the brand. So it's not really any more independent. But over and over, it was kind of like, they know the space better because they're in it, and their reputation is really on the line when they're publishing this stuff. So again, that doesn't mean, like folks can work with a vendor to do it, but I strongly encourage brands to put their name on the research and own it, however they do it behind the scenes to get there. But they shouldn't think that they have to and should only publish research by a big name consultancy or a third party. They should be doing their own and branding it as their own to build their authority.
Right. That's right. I suppose there's pros and cons for either one, right? So,
yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So here comes the bonus question. If you were to go and learn a new skill right now, what new skill would it be and why?
For me, it would be how to use the custom chat GPTs a little better. I've been playing with those. I know that
Okay.
I don't think AI is going away. A lot of people have different opinions about AI in writing content, but my belief is it's just a tool, and a tool is only as good as the expert driving it. And I don't care, how it's about the outcome is the content quality.
Yes.
Doesn't matter to me how it gets there, whether it's all human driven or it's AI human driven, but is it quality? So just figuring out how to use those kind of AI drafting tools like ChatGPT a little bit more effectively and efficiently is something that I'm working on.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. And I think we're all still trying to wrap our head around that, right? A lot of people that are out there saying that they're ChatGPT experts. This technology hasn't existed for that long, right? So
yeah, I just think there's better ways for me to how can I put in a client style guide and have it consistently check that. Those are things that it can be way more accurate than me. I have to, when I'm editing something, I'm keeping all those little pieces in my head and checking the style guide, but it's going to do a much more efficient and effective job if I can get it set up right,
Yeah, no, for sure. Becky, once again, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for sharing your expertise in this research report, which I thought was incredibly interesting with our audience. So please, quick intro to yourself and how folks out there can get in touch with you.
Yeah. So I'm Becky Lawlor, and I am founder and chief research officer at Redpoint Content. And folks can get in touch with me at becky@redpointcontent.com on LinkedIn, or at my website, redpoint.com, which also you can download your free copy of my report. It's actually not gated. So feel free to go there and just download the report if you're interested in digging into the findings more.
Fantastic. All right, Becky, once again, thanks for your time. Take care, stay safe, and talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, bye for now.